There's some of the picture out the way. There we go. All right. So it's going to talk about building student engagement and study skills. And really what we're looking at here is thinking about the student learning experience and how do we help shift from this social anxiety and feeling overwhelmed and stuck? How do we help students shift into a different space so we can overcome these barriers? And what we'll be talking about is the lessons that we learned from the pandemic, basically. So the sort of shift, the sudden, as we know, shift to online learning threw us into a huge new space of creativity and challenge, to say the least. And we were really fortunate to be able to try out some really interesting new ideas on this module that I teach called Designing Sustainable Futures. And it's a core undergraduate model across planning, the whole of my department, which is planning and environmental management. Introduces global sustainability challenges and possible solutions. And it is a very professional orientated module, but it's also the module into which we've embedded the core study skills, which would be useful for any university student across any module. So yes, this module was very much about sustainability, planning, a professional module, but almost all of what I'm going to talk about, we think is actually applicable to any university student in terms of building engagement and study skills. And we were really delighted, of course, to win the Association of European Schools of Planning Prize for Excellence in Teaching, specifically for the digital innovation here. But what we're going to talk about today is the core lessons and the principles behind them that for overcoming social anxiety and overcoming overwhelm that can be translated into almost any teaching setting. And indeed, I think will be very, very powerful in face-to-face, dual and remote learning in the future. So the order of what I was going to talk about was go through the key lessons for overcoming social anxiety and building student engagement from this last year that we learned. Then a brief discussion with you. So we'll put this into practice, do a brief discussion, put you into breakout groups, have a brief discussion on the insights and ideas that you've heard from that first part, give you a chance to get to know a few of each other as well. Then come back into plenary for any key questions or discussions that you want to ask back to me or indeed the teaching team. So we've got, like I say, Bertie and Gloria here with us. Then overcoming overwhelm and building study skills. What are some of the things that really about the study skills that we learned? And I'll talk a little bit about how we use Padlet, combined Padlet and hands-on learning in developing study skills. Again, go into a small breakout room, brief discussion, and then come back with any questions back to the teaching team. So I hope that works for you, and we will finish at 3 o'clock, but we'll be happy to stay behind. Certainly I'm happy to stay behind for a bit if there's any further questions. So I'll give you a chance to gracefully exit at 3, but we'll happily stay behind as well. So overcoming social anxiety. We've got 3 different things that we learned that I want to talk about here. One is sense of place exercises to help students introduce themselves. There was something about the fragmentation of learning online that really brought to the fore the need to help students ground themselves in who they were and where they were. And I think this has been a really powerful way of helping students introduce themselves in groups and as part of their group projects. Doing short bursts of engagement, no matter what the setting. So making sure that you build in little bursts of engagement. And I've got some key principles that we've learned about that, whether or not it's in face-to-face teaching, in a huge lecture hall, remote or dual, and introducing these new skills and technologies and ways you're asking students to engage step by step so that you're not throwing them in the deep end all at once. So, one of the things we did was we introduced some very simple exercises around place to help students introduce themselves. One of the exercises was just asking the students to draw where they'd spent the last year, so where they're just coming from. So in our case, of course, it was where you'd spent lockdown, but come September, it is already September, come 2 weeks' time when I'm meeting my first years for the first time, I'm going to ask them to sit down with a piece of paper and draw where they've just come from. What matters to them in their place? Where have they come from? and then use that to actually introduce themselves to each other in small groups. So online, we ask people to just put the pictures up on Padlet and introduce them. In face-to-face teaching, I'll ask them to just show each other really simple drawings. And I do demonstrate this myself as well. So for instance, the picture, these two pictures, one was drawn by my 9-year-old, the other was drawn by me. My 9-year-old is a much better drawer than me, but we do these exercises too. And we just show it's light, it's easy. It doesn't have to be beautiful graphics. So that was one of the exercises we used. Where have you come from? And we use that to get people into groups fairly early on to sort of introduce themselves to each other, just in the early social sort of engagement, just in the early breakout rooms or discussions, just something that was light touch but helped them bring part of themselves into the mix, and making it as light as possible by demonstrating my own personal rough drawings of where I'd been spending time. Another exercise we did a little bit later was we used this exercise to help get students to introduce themselves to a new group, which was going to be their group work session, the group in which they were going to do their project. So again, it's this to reduce social anxiety, doing something about something outside of them but related to them that they could bring in, that they could use to talk about themselves in a way that was as non-threatening as possible. So using place to help them introduce themselves to each other. So we also asked people to go and take a picture of somewhere near where they were now. So again, we're grounding them. Where are you now? Take a picture of somewhere where you are now and just look about something that catches your eyes, something that catches your imagination or makes you think, and bring that in to share. And again, we got such an interesting mix. Clearly, this was when we were all in lockdown, so we had people from all over the place bringing in pictures. So I think this really helped ground students in where they're from and where they are now, and helped take them outside of themselves a little bit in terms of introducing themselves to each other. But the exercises themselves were really quite profound. These were the words that they came up with when we asked them to think about sense of place. So this is something about belonging and home and memories and grounding. And so there was something that was helping bring up some of the sort of emotional things that they might be facing through doing this exercise. And of course, these exercises could bring you all sorts of interesting possibilities for linking to content learning, depending on the module. So obviously, I teach planning, so we could talk about space and change and how, and this was a beautiful instance where the community map, it's the map that the student drew, I found so intriguing and I couldn't work it out. I actually asked her to get me a picture of that place, and this enabled us to talk about urban development in China. But equally, if you look at the sorts of things that these students were talking about that sense of place meant to them, you can talk about leadership, you can talk about identity, you can talk about what it means to be a student. So you could talk about the sort of more generic leadership issues or content related issues to do with sustainability or place, if that was, or history, if that was appropriate. So that was an example of a short burst of engagement. So what we've really found from this was the power of little short interactions frequently throughout any lecture or any setting. So it's really trying to make sure that we actually have short bursts of engagement in almost every teaching time. And that can be, it can be one quick session, or it could be throughout a whole workshop. But in order to make that work, you need to make sure that people have the time and capacity to reflect and develop ideas. So again, this is, we're trying to think here about overcoming social anxiety. It can make people feel quite nervous to say, okay, go and chat, go and talk to the other students. Instead, if you give people time on their own to write or develop their thinking before they share their ideas, brief pauses, and give them something to draw or work on, so there's a physical representation of their ideas, something literally to hold on to, it can really help them to feel more confident in sharing their ideas. And one of the key things we learned was using a visual and shared language for this engagement really helps them to engage with each other. So bringing physical learning into online spaces, what we were doing last year, that sort of idea of show and tell, bring something you created, bring an object, a photo, or doing something in real time together. That could be Lego play, or creating a mind map, creating a diagram or a map like the sense of place diagram, doing some art, or using this toolkit called KETO Connect, which I'll introduce in a moment. What we found was it really helped reduce the social anxiety if you give people something to do, something to look at, something outside of themselves that they could engage with and use to help them reflect and think about what they want to share with their colleagues. It gives them confidence to speak up. So KETO Connect was a new tool that we developed from the pandemic out of the last several decades of my work and experience in doing stakeholder engagement and engaged teaching. KETO is a hands-on kit for learning and engagement that I developed in Southern Africa, in fact, in the mid-90s in Lesotho and near Rustenburg. And it was a way to sort of make sure that everybody's voice was heard, everybody's ideas were on the table. Since then, it's been launched as a social business, used in over half the UK's university. There's a ton of peer-reviewed outputs, and it had earlier won an International Teaching Award for bringing engagement into large classes. And it's been used in teaching from primary to PhD. So it's an established toolkit for teaching. But this was all face-to-face. This was all leaning over the table, touching things. What were we going to do during the pandemic to bring that sense of engagement and the visual and the physical into remote learning? Faced with that sort of empty classroom and that look of panic on my face, at least, of how on earth we were going to make this work from my living room, we created something that was small enough to be posted to all of our students. So it's been sent out to over 2,000 participants to date, a small personal individual kit that you can actually use to develop thinking on your own, in your own space, but your own space could be in a lecture hall, it could be coming in by Zoom into a physical space, or it could be in remote learning, or indeed in a small group work. And this enables us to help the students to develop their thinking and to develop a structured turn-taking process. So you give them time on their own to develop their ideas, and then you can use the icons to ask participants to choose one or two ideas to share in advance. So the more preparation you've got before you share your ideas in the breakout rooms, the more confident you feel. And then we ask the students to go around the circle, sharing their ideas with one student as a facilitator in each room. But because what we found is because the ideas were movable and they could be changed in response to the discussion, that the students were able to listen to some other ideas and then maybe change what they wanted to say and react on the fly, but in a way that they've got something to work with to help them have something to talk about. These short bursts of engagement can be a quick reflection. It can be something like give 10 examples of climate change adaptation. What factors need to be taken into account when thinking about this? What have you learned in this session? What have you learned over this semester? What questions do you have? It can be very simple like that, just something just to stop and think. Or you could be developing that engagement through several stages, building through a workshop or even in between lectures. And one of the things we found was that by giving students this hands-on visual learning aid, they drew ideas through their sessions more readily than I've ever seen before. One of the powerful things here as well was the visibility of individuals' work in progress. We were able to make students' contribution to group work more visible and give more permission to show work in progress, which can really help reduce that anxiety of saying, oh, what if I got it wrong? I don't know if I want to show my work. Because it's flexible and movable and everybody's doing the same thing, it makes it much easier for students to put up their work to discuss. We made it a requirement to show evidence of some work in progress for group work. And I had fewer complaints about lack of contribution than I've ever had before, because everybody knew that everybody was going to do something and we were going to check that everybody had put some kind of work in progress up on the Padlet. So we really found this was a powerful way to get the students to engage with each other, and for the teaching assistants to be able to give feedback in the small groups, because we all knew that we were all using the same resources, and it really helped to sort of develop that rapport very quickly. And that was online. I'm really looking forward to doing this in the physical space this semester. But it was really important to introduce the skills and the technologies step by step. So you don't throw people in and say, okay, we're going to use Padlet, we're going to use KETO Connect, you're going to be facilitators. What we did was we built from day one, each step slowly but surely. So we just did, we're going to put you in breakout rooms, you can introduce yourself. Opening and typing into Padlet, which is a digital canvas so that they could share their ideas, a simple question. Then we got them to use KETO Connect. And then we got them to share the ideas just in a breakout room, just sharing them verbally. Then later we got them to take a picture of their KETOs via Padlet and using the pictures as part of the discussion. And later we got the student facilitators to share their screens in breakout rooms and develop their technological skills in that way. So introducing those skills and techniques step by step, again, help reduce that sense of anxiety and not knowing how to do things. But we also made sure we flagged the fact that they were learning these professional skills development. So that these were professional skills they could use in the future. This was a key lesson I learned last year, was putting that in the timetable and flagging it as such. You're learning a stakeholder and community engagement method. You're learning how to be a facilitator. You're learning how to do these things that you can put on your CV later. So that was a really interesting lesson. And in this case, you're also able to point people to something and say, look, here's a bunch of other people in health, people in local government that are using these toolkits that we're introducing you to. This is building professional skills you can use later. Feedback so far has been really, really good. So yes, it's helped people to engage and focus and to actually talk to each other. And really, I think the most powerful thing here is it's helping them to learn, helping them to really engage with their material and with each other. And in particular, it's an inclusive process because you're bringing the visual, the oral, the reading, the kinesthetic learning together so that every student feels more confident and more able to respond and engage. This was feedback from a few years ago about the use of KETO, particularly where we were able to actually break down the feedback into students from a widening participation or with students with unseen disability. And it's really powerful to note that these visual, oral, kinesthetic approaches are incredibly powerful for helping students with unseen disabilities to engage. And we really did find that this reduced social anxiety, brainstorming ideas together, building teamwork, helping people feel more confident to speak up and share their ideas. So there we go. Overcoming social anxiety and building student engagement. We started out early on with those sense of place exercises. Where were you? Where are you now? Using that to introduce to each other. Bringing in short bursts of engagement, no matter what the setting, using that show and tell, physical, visual approaches, but introducing the skills and technologies that they needed to do that step by step so it wasn't overwhelming at first. So those are that's the overview of the key lessons.
Recording in progress.
What I'd like you to do is we're going to put you into breakout rooms so you can introduce each other, have a little chat as well. If a few of you've got your KETOs, if you've got your KETOs, you get out a green leaf and write down one idea per leaf. Otherwise, just grab a pencil or a pen and write down a few insights or ideas that you could from what I've just discussed that you could use in your practice. I'm going to give you 1 minute to do that. I'd just like you to stop and think, just like I would be asking my students to do, of a few things insights from what I've just talked about that you can use in your practice, or indeed any questions. So I'm going to give you just a minute to do that, and then we'll pop you into breakout rooms. Now students are so often stuck. How do I even get started on my assignment? How do I even start to think about it? we've got three key things that we've been really building into this course, and we learned a lot about last year. Building the study skills development into the timetable, making it useful for assignments. And I will talk about that in a second. Step-by-step introduction to critical thinking. So once again, it's that breaking things down into steps, but using this idea of metaphor movement to actually help people develop their critical thinking skills. So this is an example of this undergraduate course. And again, how we've built how to reference the fundamentals of essay writing, thinking about referencing and writing reports. But each of these, we did exercises that was relevant to the assignment for this module. So again, we signposted that we were doing this study skills development, but we made it useful for their actual assignments. And that was really powerful. And we introduced this critical thinking in a step-by-step way. So we'd ask students to go and just bring some arguments and ideas from your reading to the workshop. Just bring some thoughts of what are the possible ideas or things that you could say in an essay. Okay, in the workshop then, what are some of the counter arguments? How can you argue against that point? Can you argue, what are some of the weaknesses, or the barriers, or the counter arguments? But then how do we know? What are the examples? Who says? And then ask people to think a little bit about, okay, well, so what? But from what you've been thinking so far, what might be the key points? What are you learning from this? This almost can become your conclusion to your essay. But again, we went through step by step, but a really key part of this was having a flexible approach to helping students realize they can move their ideas around. They can look for patterns, they can see how ideas relate to each other, and they could put them into different orders and clusters and then start to actually structure them into a report or an assignment. And as I heard from a colleague early on when I was developing KETO Connect, if only I had £1 for every time I'd written the feedback, lovely ideas, I wish this essay had more structure. One of the key things that we're finding is that by giving people the means to develop their ideas in a granular step-by-step way, but then to move them and restructure them, they actually start to see the patterns and the connections in their ideas. It really also helps, and you've got this visual language to help people compare, contrast, and reflect, and for the peers and the tutors, for the peers to give each other feedback, and for the tutors to give them feedback. So this is an example where we were using Padlet, which is a digital canvas, to get the students to share their ideas. And I had a breakthrough in my thinking as I was doing this, with even when I'm back in lecture halls in a few weeks, I'm still going to get students to do their work and take pictures of it right there in Padlets with QR codes to get them into the breakout rooms right there in the lecture hall. So they've got that record of the idea and they can share them throughout the whole module. So this is an example of a Padlet that we built for a module where we've got Padlets for breakout rooms in the lecture groups, Padlets for their assignment groups. We've got the QR codes for them to get into those groups and the resources for them to learn how to use this digital tool, combining the physical and the digital together. And you'll be delighted to know that there is a thrilling 1.5-minute video where I actually teach students how to take a picture of their KETO Connect and get it into Padlet that's free for anybody to use. So if you want to start thinking about how to use this digital tool in physical teaching, no matter what the setting, we started developing a suite of resources that you can actually use to do that. But that's the technology. This is all about learning as movement, about helping students get those shifts in perception, that aha moment when they suddenly see the connections between their own understanding and what they're reading, between their ideas, and start to structure their thinking and their learning. Now, I am so thrilled by this personal individual use of KETO. We've never ever in the past had thousands of people with their own KETO Connect kit. It's always their own KETO kit. It's always been, you come to a workshop, we do a group workshop, at best we take a picture of it and you go away. This is something where they've got that throughout their whole learning career to help them structure their ideas. This is so exciting. And I think we got these surprising insights from students. Like one student, this is a first year, that hung up, used the bag to hang her kit up on the wall. And then she said, I wasn't losing my ideas. I was passing by it every day. I was coming up with new ideas. Before I knew it, she'd written her essay. So that was really exciting. It's bringing that sense of movement and learning into their physical spaces, but also it's that granular ideas. Just get started, write something down, something that's physical that you can see, that you can then start to move around, and you can start to see because they're colored, you can start to see the connections between ideas. And so often I had students say, I never really thought about this before, but the strengths and the barriers, they're often part of the same theme. They're starting to see the links across ideas. I loved this example from a third year student who, in fact, got a first on her dissertation. So I was very pleased about that, using KETO Connect to structure her dissertation. And she was using it in a very different way, pulling it together in a puzzle. And that's, I think, part of what's so exciting here is the students, we're giving them certain ground rules about thinking critically, about developing structure, but then they're developing their own skills and their ways of using it differently. But we are basing this on this metaphor of growth, this idea of the brown soil, you've got to growth, the new ideas, gray challenges, grows more ideas and goals. There's a certain metaphor of growth behind the leaves that we've been really embedding into all of our teaching and thinking to help the students just get this new way of thinking and this new idea about how they can develop their study skills, but really getting it sort of part of their daily study and work. So there you go. Building the study skills development into the timetable, but making it useful for assignments. That step-by-step granular introduction to critical thinking, but showing and developing that idea of the metaphors of growth and movement behind that thinking so that it becomes embedded in the way students approach their learning. So once again, I'm going to give you just about just under a minute, just to quickly have a think about, write down any insights or ideas or any questions that you've got from that. This sort of the lessons we learn from study skills, and we'll go back into the same breakout group, so you'll have more time to actually discuss and less time to just introduce yourself. Any insights, and in particular, any questions you've still got after that you'd like to bring back to the plenary for the last 5 minutes or so. So we'll be going into breakout rooms because Gloria, can we change it? Should we give people 7 minutes? I'll give you 7 minutes. We'll go into the breakout room. Great, well, thank you so much. That was a brilliant set of questions. It's always insightful to learn from everybody else. And just so that you know, there's a ton of resources online. There's how-tos about how to plan workshops, all sorts of study skills workshops that we've tried and tested and made available. And there's lots of information online, and we're very happy to take any questions. Do stay in touch, and we'd love to hear how you use any of the ideas from this workshop and from the lessons that we've all learned from last year. Thank you.